The expansion of railroads is going to lead to the rise of big business in the United States. Is going to be key to opening up the Western United States because it's going to allow for people to easily travel and move to the western part of the U.S. It's also going to aid in the development of other industries because companies can now easily transport their goods across the railroad and across the nation. You could see here in the mid to late 1800s is when the railroads are really going to rise. The red lines on the map are showing railroads that were added between 1870 and 1900. So you could see prior to that, there were only really railroad lines on the eastern portion of the United States, and there was no way to connect with the West. So now that these railroad lines are being created throughout the entire nation, everyone can easily be connected. The second industrial revolution is also going to develop in the late 1800s, and this is because of many new inventions and big businesses opening up. Initially, this growth was aided by lack of government control in business affairs, and the lack of having the government involved in business affairs is known as laissez-faire, and this is really going to help some of these companies turn into major corporations at the time. We will also see changes in the workplace, and one of these changes was brought about by Frederick W. Taylor, and he's a mechanical engineer that developed this idea called Taylorism. And Taylorism has an emphasis on speed and efficiency in the workplace. He came up with the concept of paying workers by the piece, which would make them produce more and make them work harder. He also pushed for assembly line production so that more can get done in a workday. Rather than have one person create an entire product from start to finish, the assembly line allows one person to create one portion of the product, move it down the line to another person who adds another piece, and so on. And it makes it so that companies are more productive. There's also going to be more workers in the workplace. Children, women, and immigrants are going to be those individuals, and they'll be able to join the factory workforce with little skill. By 1900, nearly 20% of kids ages 10 to 15 were employed and working in factories. Another reason why factories would want to employ children and women was because they can pay them less. So skilled women would make $5 a week, whereas unskilled men would make $8 a week. So it was more cost effective to hire women at the time. Another concept that is coming into light is this idea of social Darwinism. And it was created by William Graham Sumner. And he claimed that God had granted power and wealth to those who deserved it. Believers in social Darwinism could justify any scheme that could bring more power to families like the Rockefellers and the Carnegies because God had wanted them to have economic power. So what social Darwinism is doing, it is making the wealthy feel justified in having their wealth and not feel guilty for being as wealthy as they are. And as these individuals during this time become more and more wealthy, there's two concepts that come to light. And these concepts are robber baron or captain of industry. So individuals that are creating these major corporations, some people saw them as robber barons. And this would be a person who employs ethically questionable methods to eliminate their competition and develop a monopoly in their industry so they wouldn't have any competition at all. And they would have very little empathy for their workers. Captains of industry, on the other hand, are someone who has tries to help others, is a philanthropist. They made their wealth and used it in a way that could benefit society, such as providing more jobs or increasing productivity. So we're going to learn about a few different individuals that owned major corporations at this time, and they are going to see themselves as captains of industry. But people at the time, and people still today, really see them as robber barons. One of the first individuals that I want to mention is Cornelius Vanderbilt, and he is going to make his money in the shipping and railroad industry. So he was a shipping and railroad tycoon. He was self-made. He started in the steamship industry, and he is going to gradually shift in the 1860s due to the advice of his son into the railroad industry. He led the drive for consolidation of business. So what he would do is he would take control of smaller businesses and add them into his company, or he would push out the competition by having very low freight rates for his railroads, and the other companies couldn't keep up with that price, and so they would go out of business. So he would kill the competition. So this allows Vanderbilt to take control of most of the railroad industry. Another person who is very successful is John D. Rockefeller, and he's going to establish the Standard Oil Company in 1870, and he wants to control the entire industry. By 1879, he controls 90% of the oil refining business, and he creates a monopoly. There are two concepts that he takes to create his huge monopoly. And one of these concepts is known as horizontal integration. And this is where a dominant company forces out its weaker competitors. So he could do this by lowering his prices, and then he can make it so that the companies go out of business, or he could also try to buy the smaller companies before they go out of business. So that's something that Rockefeller is doing. He's trying to take over all of the other oil refining businesses and making it so that Standard Oil is one of the only ones out there. Another process that he uses in creating his monopoly is vertical integration. And this is where a business owns an entire manufacturing process. So not only would Rockefeller own the oil refining businesses, he would own everything involved with the business. So everything from producing oil, refining it, delivery service, wagons, the company that would make the barrels that the oil would go in, tanker ships, pipelines. He owns the entire process. This makes it less expensive for him to run his business, and it turns his business into this huge, huge organization. And that's really represented here in this political cartoon from the time period that is showing Standard Oil Company as this giant octopus over the United States. And the tentacles are representing all the different businesses that Rockefeller would have owned at the time. And it's just taking control of the entire industry. And he has so much power and wealth that he's able to control the government as well. Because you could see the tentacles from the octopus are going over the White House and the Capitol building as well. And this is just another political cartoon showing how much power Rockefeller did have. So he really creates this huge monopoly for the oil industry. Another successful businessman at the time was Andrew Carnegie, and he has a rags to riches story. So he didn't start off wealthy. He was an immigrant from Scotland, and he moved to the United States with basically nothing. He's going to start working full-time at age 13. He would work 12-hour workdays. He started off working in a textile mill, and he would continue to move up in position with different companies. Some other jobs that he held, he was a personal secretary. He worked in the telegraph business for a while. He even worked in the railroad industry. And he eventually decides that he wants to focus on the iron and steel industry as the industry where he's going to make his money. During this time, there was a man, his name was Henry Bessemer, and he created this new process for mass production of steel. And it's known as the Bessemer process. And the process created a high-quality steel that was produced for less money, and it was produced quicker. So It was an inexpensive process for mass production of steel from molten pig iron. And the key principle behind it was that you would heat up the iron and take out the impurities, and air would be blown through this iron to create the steel that you would use for things like railroad lines, buildings, machinery, anything that could use steel. So you can make steel quicker and more efficiently and for less money. And Carnegie is going to use this to his advantage. And he's going to create the Carnegie Steel Company. And he's very successful. By 1900, he's going to have 20,000 employees. His employees are going to work 2 daily 12-hour shifts. So the factory is constantly running. And the only day that he would give his employees off would be the 4th of July. So he's very, very successful. Another wealthy individual is John Pierpont Morgan, and he is actually born wealthy. He realizes that railroads are important to the nation's growth, and he is going to own 1/6 of the industry by the 1890s. He's also going to buy Carnegie Steel for $480 million in 1901. And he's going to form the U.S. Steel Corporation, which is still around today. It's going to be the world's first billion-dollar company, and he's going to employ 168,000 workers. And he's going to completely dominate the steel industry. So all of these men are really gaining all of this wealth, which is being shown in this political cartoon. So the wealthy corporations are at the top of everything, getting fat and wealthy from the work of all these poor individuals below them who are holding them up and bringing wealth to the industries and to the nation while they're staying poor.